Nearly a century ago, the magnificent West Baden Springs Hotel was built in the quiet countryside of southern Indiana. For 30 years, guests from around the world would enjoy its splendid spaces. Then, practically overnight, the Great Depression forced the hotel to close. It was converted to a Jesuit seminary and later a college. But by the early 1980s, the property lay vacant and rapidly deteriorating. A decade later, this historic landmark began to collapse. Then, a dedicated preservation group stepped in. They found a remarkable benefactor and together, with the effort of hundreds of talented people, began an extraordinary transformation. Some call it the save of the century. Visitors have been coming to Springs Valley, Indiana since before recorded history. Here, 100 miles southwest of Indianapolis, sulfur-enriched mineral water bubbles up from the underground. For hundreds of years, buffalo herds traveling from the Wabash River to the falls of the Ohio stopped in the valley to lick the salt left by evaporating mineral water. The buffalo attracted American Indians and later French trappers searching for game. Legend holds that the American Indians first recognized the medicinal powers of the mineral water.
It was an absolute haven for Indians because they had all the wildlife they wanted, and they had discovered the medicinal powers of the waters. There was something magical about the waters in the valley, something curing and healing about it.
From about the mid-19th century, the mineral springs in the Springs Valley, the two towns of West Baden and French Lick, drew people because they were believed to be healthy.
By the early 1880s, the Indians were long gone, and in the valley, the healing waters could be drunk at two rival hotels, the French Lick Springs Hotel and the West Baden Inn. Located a mile apart, both operated as somewhat inaccessible, modest country resorts. The Monon Railroad would soon change all that.
The Monon train was incredibly important to the development of the valley. Again, prior to the Monon train coming into the valley pretty much shut down in the wintertime. The Monon train came in from St. Louis. They had a run in from Indianapolis, from Louisville. Altogether, when it was the heyday of the trains, there were 14 trains a day stopping in French Lick and West Baden.
In 1887, an astute businessman named Lee Wiley Sinclair stepped off a train, looked around, and saw opportunity at the West Baden Inn.
Mr. Sinclair, Colonel Lee Sinclair from Salem, Indiana, came along and decided, you know, there's a lot of money to be made here. Now, Mr. Sinclair was very, very wealthy already. He had woolen mills and he had banking interest and so forth, but he wanted that inn. So he started buying shares out, and he bought the first share out and said, let's do some wonderful changes here. And everybody else that was involved with the place said, no, we like it the way it is. And so he bought another share until finally he had the controlling interest, 3/4 interest. At that time, then he said, stand back, it's my turn.
Sinclair gained control of the hotel in the summer of 1888. Within 2 decades, he would expand this modest country hotel into an internationally known luxury resort. He began by opening the hotel year-round instead of only during the summer watering season. He then embarked on an ambitious expansion program. By 1898, the hotel offered an opera house, indoor swimming in the new natatorium, a unique double-decker bicycle track, and 500 guest rooms, steam-heated and lighted by electricity. The spring water could be drunk on-site or purchased in bottles. Sinclair named it Sprudelwater, after the German word for spring, and made incredible claims for the water's medicinal value.
The mineral water, which we think of today as being fairly nasty to have to drink, they thought they might not have liked the taste of it even then, but they believed that it cured a whole host of diseases, and from external skin problems to cancers and internal difficulties.
Although not yet the favored spot of the wealthy elite, by the turn of the century, the West Baden Inn had achieved importance as a resort for many mid-Americans. It also proved to be a serious rival for the expanding French Lick Springs Hotel. And then, disaster struck. At 1 o'clock in the morning on June 14, 1901, a fire somehow started in the kitchen. The 268 guests staying in the hotel that night were quickly roused and evacuated without injury. Within 90 minutes, the wood-framed West Baden Inn had burned to the ground. 13 years of expansion and effort lay in ashes. But luckily, all was not lost.
Now, everything that was on one side of the road, which was the hotel side of the road, burned completely to the ground. Everything on the other side was spared. So the spring houses, the opera house was spared, the bottling works, and the double-decker bicycle track. All of that was spared. The crux of the operation was the hotel building, and it was gone, totally destroyed.
Sinclair initially reacted to the tragedy by offering to sell the West Baden property to rival French Lick Springs. The French Lick Springs Hotel Company, with its influential manager Thomas Taggart, rejected the offer. Tradition holds that Lillian Sinclair, Lee's beloved daughter, then convinced him to rebuild. Whether at her urging or in response to the French Lick rejection, at age 65, Lee Sinclair decided to start again.
The next day, Mr. Sinclair announced not only would he rebuild the hotel, he would rebuild a hotel that would be considered the eighth wonder of the world. And the kicker to this, the big kicker, was that he vowed to have it open 1 year to the date of the fire.
Sinclair bought out his remaining partner and began planning a hotel that would be grander than any hotel in the country. It would be constructed of fireproof materials, and unlike the previous structure, would be circular with an area enclosed by the world's largest unsupported dome. He began the search for an architect to carry out his vision.
There were many architects that were quick to line up to meet Mr. Sinclair, who was very rich, and offer him wonderful ideas for a great hotel. But the dome was the writing factor with Mr. Sinclair. He wanted this huge freestance dome. So all of the architects would come in, meet with him, listen to his idea, and say, Mr. Sinclair, you're a great old guy with a great idea. I'd love to take your money, but you're nuts. It can't be done. It just can't be built. And then Harrison Albright, a young architect who truly was pretty much unproven by that time, came in and listened to him and said, yes, I can do that for you. Not only can I build it, not only can I design it, but I will agree to a penalty clause for every day over the 1-year target date.
The central feature of the new hotel would be a magnificent domed atrium supported by 24 brick columns. A double ring of guest rooms and service areas would encircle the atrium. The architect's major challenge was to design and construct a 200-foot freestanding dome that would accommodate southern Indiana's climate. On some days in the Springs Valley, the temperature changes as much as 40 or 50 degrees. The steel and glass planned for the dome's construction would need to expand and contract instead of shattering with the temperature changes.
The solution for achieving that span of 200 feet was quite simple. He hired a bridge engineer out of Chicago, and 200-foot span for a bridge, when given the height of a dome, is a cakewalk.
Using bridge building techniques, Albright and his engineer devised an elegant solution to the expansion problem. They joined individual steel trusses to a large steel drum in the center of the dome, counterbalancing opposing lateral forces. At the outside edge of the dome, Albright did not fasten each truss directly to the supporting columns. Instead, he used a pin, plate, and roller system, allowing the truss to move over the top of the column as it expanded and contracted. Sinclair chose the general contracting firm of Caldwell and Drake from Columbus, Indiana, to execute Albright's design. 500 workers rushed the project toward completion.
The hotel was actually opened 1 year to the date of the fire in June of 1902 with the first invited guest. By that I mean Mr. Sinclair did invite a small group of friends from Chicago. Then it was in September of 1902 that he opened the hotel to his guest. And then in April of the next year, 1903, was the formal dedication and opening of the hotel.
Sinclair's new West Baden Springs Hotel succeeded brilliantly. Sympathetic journalists and hotel literature soon flaunted it as the eighth wonder of the world. Guests, including the rich and famous, flocked to take the waters and enjoy the amenities. The hotel atrium and first floor offered the services of a small town, complete with dining areas, shops of all sorts, a stock brokerage, clothing stores, sitting areas, children's play spaces, and even a movie house. Soon, in addition to following prescriptive water regimens, guests could play golf, stroll the grounds, ride horses, swim in the pool, hike or join tourist excursions to natural attractions such as Mount Airy or Outlaw Cave. Indoor shooting, pocket billiards, and bowling were available in the casino, or visitors could simply wander over to the nearby bicycle track.
The bicycle track was really a neat feature in as much as the lower part of it was for horseback riding, and really it was more like a pony track. The top of it was wooden, of course, and it was for bicycling. But in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock, bicycles were taken off, chairs came out, and it became the promenade. It was lighted, so in the evening you could get out and walk through the track and have a nice covered place to walk with your lady and enjoy the evening. Late afternoons during certain times of the year, it was a very popular spot because of the baseball diamonds. There were baseball diamonds in the center, and a lot of the big pro league teams of the day came to the Valley for their spring training.
Sinclair even fielded his own baseball team, made up of African-American hotel workers. The team played exhibition games for and against hotel guests. Guests could find just about any diversion on the grounds except alcohol. It was thought that the spring water reacted badly with alcohol, so alcoholic beverages were not allowed at the hotel. However, they were available in the town of West Baden, just outside the hotel gates. Sometime after 1911, Sinclair, now an old man, passed the management of the hotel to Charles Rexford, his daughter Lillian's husband. Rexford added another golf course on the hill behind the hotel and planned additional expansion.
About that time, there was another major fire on the property. This time it took out the casino, it took out the bottling works, it took out the hospital. Actually, that's where it started. It started in the x-ray room of the hospital. There was a very, very big hospital on the grounds to cater to the sick guests that came in to partake of the waters. But it pretty much wiped everything out but the hotel, because the hotel, again, was 100% fireproof.
Rexford borrowed money and began an extensive renovation. He transformed the atrium into a lavish Pompeian court. Marble now covered the first-floor brick walls. An intricate mosaic covered the cement floor, and paintings adorned the upper walls and domed ceiling. plaster and painted canvas now cloak the plain brick columns. The old brick fireplace was redone with an elaborate ceramic tile scene of the Sprudel Gnome with the hotel and waters. Marble benches, statues of muses, and urns completed the motif. The hotel's exterior and gardens were redone to reflect the classical style of the interior. The Hygeia, Apollo, and Sprudel spring houses soon replaced the old wooden structures. A large veranda was added to the front of the hotel. Because of the costs of renovation, a faltering national economy, and changes in the country's vacation habits, the hotel soon faced financial insolvency. A brief respite occurred in 1918 when the United States Army leased the hotel and operated a hospital for returning World War I casualties. A year later, the Army closed its hospital and ended its lease. Debt continued to mount. To retire the debt, in 1922, the West Baden Springs Hotel was sold to Ed Ballard, a West Baden entrepreneur and a former hotel employee.
Ed Ballard owned the hotel from 1922 to 1932, which was really one of the briefest ownership periods of the hotel, but it was one of the biggest eras of the hotel. That was the gangster era. That's when you had Al Capone coming down, and the joke always was with Al Capone is if he showed up in the valley, all you had to do was pick up a Chicago paper and see what trouble he was in Chicago. A lot of the big, powerful people of the day were around at that time because Ed Ballard was a powerful person himself. He was bringing in lots of convention business now, and there are wonderful pictures of conventions being held out in the middle of that big atrium. Everything was going great for him up until 1929. Of course, that was the stock market crash. And you went from a hotel that was filled with over 700 rooms of people one night to literally 4 or 5 people staying the night after the crash. It was the demise of the hotel, certainly.
Unable to find a buyer for the hotel, in 1934 Ballard donated the property to the Chicago province of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. One of the most magnificent resort hotels in the world became a Jesuit seminary. Irony and architectural change marked the Jesuit era. Members of a religious order noted for humility and simplicity now occupied the 8th wonder of the world. The Jesuits removed many of the building's worldly trappings and configured space to meet their needs.
They closed the wall in the lobby area, and that became their chapel. At first they considered using the atrium, but the atrium is too immense for a chapel, so they made the lobby their chapel. They took out the regular glass that was in all of the doors and the arched windows above the doors and put stained glass windows and doors in.
Religious statuary now adorned the atrium. During this era, the 4 Moorish towers and the decorative scallop disappeared from the roof. The Jesuits also capped the springs and removed the garden fountain.
They were operating a seminary, so while they made changes that did diminish the architectural character of the place, we think we wouldn't have had a building to save if they hadn't been there for that length of time, because at the end of the Depression, during the Depression, Ed Ballard tried to sell the building and couldn't find any buyers. So he gave it to the Jesuits for $1, and they did maintain the place.
During the 1960s, seminary enrollment dropped. This fact, coupled with mounting expenses maintaining the aging building, forced the Jesuits to abandon the property in 1964 and move to Chicago. The building sat vacant for 2 years until Mr. and Mrs. Macaulay Whiting of Midland, Michigan purchased the property and donated it to Northwood Institute. The former West Baden Springs Hotel became a private college specializing in hotel management, food services, fashion merchandising, automotive marketing, business, and the performing arts. Northwood appointed a restoration committee in 1972, but the task proved too daunting. Plagued by rising maintenance costs, Northwood reluctantly closed its Indiana campus in 1983.
The place was in receivership for about a period of 10 years, from 1985 to 95, until Grand Casino came in 95. They were going to build a huge lake out in front of it, put a gambling boat on the lake. The old boat in the moat is the expression that came about at that time. And It just didn't go anywhere. The state legislature said absolutely not. We will not grant you permission. It just is not going to happen.
The West Baden Springs Hotel was on our most endangered list. It was on the national most endangered list. It had a priority 1 endangered status from the U.S. Department of the Interior.
This building had been vacant for 10 years, and it was just a matter of time, and probably shorter time than longer time, when it would literally self-destruct. And
there was a collapse of a portion of the exterior ring of the building in '91. We invested a couple $100,000 at that time to try to shore the building up, even though we didn't own it, so that someone could come along later and save it. We purchased it with a $250,000 contribution and then asked the Cook Group from Bloomington to help us restore it.
We made the offer to put in whatever it took, not only to stabilize the building, but also to restore the public parts of it. So they purchased the building. However, if we so desire, we can purchase the building at any time for the amount of money that they put into it.
And he went on further to say, aren't too interested in a lot of legal documents. We've known each other a long time. We'll shake on this, and you'll understand what our mission is, and you understand what your mission is, and let's get on with it.
Cook Group and the Historic Landmarks Foundation of Indiana decided upon a set of ambitious goals for the West Baden Hotel restoration. First priority was to totally stabilize the building and prevent additional collapse. The grounds would be cleaned immediately and the gate restored to impress upon the public that a new era for the hotel had begun. The exterior surfaces of the hotel and outbuildings would be completely restored. The major interior public spaces, including the dome and lobby, would be restored to their previous splendor. Most of the private space, about 500 guest rooms, would not be restored until Historic Landmarks found a buyer for the building.
When we started this project, we had no idea what this building would become at the end. That's been one of the most difficult things about this project. When you approach a contractor or a supplier, they ask you, what are you building? And we can't ever say.
Cook Group hired general contractors Pritchett Brothers Incorporated, and restoration began on the grounds and roof.
On the roof, there was 465,000 pounds of old tar and asphalt shingles that were removed. And we replaced that with 65,000 pounds of roofing material. I don't think that dome's going to be collapsing anytime soon.
Unfortunately, much of the outer ring of the building could have collapsed at any time. A collapse had already occurred in 1991 when a 104-foot section, weakened by ice, fell to the ground.
I think the most unpleasant discovery of the restoration project was the awareness that the building was standing up out of habit and that it needed to be structurally reinforced with steel from the basement to the 6th floor and from the outside walls in if we expected it to stand.
The atrium, the dome, its original construction is rock solid. Now the slabs around the building, the concrete slabs, are in horrendous, terrible condition.
It was in places crumbling. You can almost snap it off with your hand.
Now the building really was compromised in 1901 when they accelerated the hardening of the concrete by putting in coals, charcoal, wood to heat up the concrete in the winter for it to set.
The concrete strength of these perimeter slabs at best are 1,200 psi. Today you don't even pour a sidewalk that's not at least 3,000 psi concrete.
And that meant reinforcing literally the entire building in steel.
At a cost of about $2 million, the Cook Group brought more than 3 million pounds of steel I-beams and 6 welders to the site. The welders ran a network of steel beams down the center of every corridor and across the ceiling of every room. the beams tied to the structurally sound brick walls. Within a year, a girdle of structural steel rimmed and supported the building. Although not the prettiest, this improvement may have been the most important feature of the entire restoration.
A building should be good for another 200-300 years now. It's just as good as it was. Well, it's better than it was when it was new.
The concrete slabs were not the only feature of the building compromised in the original construction. The atrium floor also had problems. By the Jesuit era, the atrium's marble-tiled floor had noticeably cracked, and decades later, pieces of the floor actually shifted in height. The Cook Group took core samples and found a bed of coal just inches beneath the floor. Groundwater reaching the coal caused a crystalline structure to grow, and it, in turn, raised the floor. Cook Group excavated the area, removed the coal, and installed a drainage system. Time pressures probably prevented this approach from being used in the original 1902 construction. Despite the problem with the atrium floor and the concrete slabs, not all of the discoveries in the project have been unpleasant ones.
In the drum, people call the drum, it's the cylinder at the top of the dome of West Baden where all of the steel girders meet. The way to get into the drum is to go out on the roof at the 6th level and climb up on a ladder that curves along with the dome, so you reach the top of the dome on the outside, and there's a small shed in the center of the roof. You go in a door, and then you drop down through a hole in the floor and climb down a ladder, and you're inside of that steel drum where all the girders are meeting. And there are frescoes of angels, archangels, and cherubs. Of course, immediately assumed that a Jesuit painted them, but we're not really certain that that's the case. There's some graffiti that suggests that perhaps they were painted before the Jesuit era.
We think, because of the dates, that sometime between 1917 and 1924, these religious figures were painted. Now, I like to speculate that the craftsman that did the mosaic floor and the craftsman that came to do the wall tile, or the marble, could have been the same people that did the drawings up there.
So it's a mystery.
When we began the project, we felt that certain public areas had to be restored. These areas included the atrium, the lobby, 2 rooms off of the lobby, and the restaurant.
I think probably when you do a preservation project, the ideal thing is to have drawings of the way the building looked, the architectural drawings from its original construction, but unfortunately, in all the documentation we found about West Baden, that was just not a treasure that we uncovered. What we had to rely on were historic photographs. Fortunately, it was a place that was photographed a lot.
If we took the building back to 1901, it wouldn't look nearly as nice. That would have meant removing the Pompeian court in the atrium. It would have meant removing many, many things in the building. The building was just minimally done in the 1901 period through 1917. Then in 1917, Gale's research indicated that the Pompeian court was put in and many, many of the amenities were put in. Also, in the 1917 period, they did some very, very beautiful decorating in the atrium. And this is where the research and where you take research and try to apply it.
The firm of Conrad Schmidt from Milwaukee, Wisconsin was asked to lead the interior decoration restoration. The painted wall coverings, which had been installed in the 1917 renovation, now were fading and falling from the walls. Conrad Schmidt recommended that painted fiberglass cloth replace the canvas.
They came down and Gale was able to draw renderings of the various wall hangings, which they were able to verify as they took layers of paint off.
Wall hangings were printed and hand-painted in the Conrad Schmidt studios, then brought to the atrium and mounted adjacent to the columns. Craftsmen at the hotel repainted additional decorative elements throughout. Canvas at the base of the dome, originally installed in 1917, was restored. Gilding brought sparkle to the details of the decoration. Day by day, artisans restored the elegance of the past.
When you walk into the building, all you can say is, wow. And I still say that every time I walk into that atrium or into the lobby. I say, wow, how can it be?
The two-story domed lobby, an equally elegant but more humanly scaled space, followed a restoration path similar to the atrium. The ceramic tile floor of the lobby also underwent careful repair and restoration. Hot liquid glue injected under the tile reattached areas that were lifting. Missing tiles were matched and relaid one at a time to replicate the original 1917 pattern.
One thing they did do during this restoration was to keep some of the traits that were added by the Jesuits. For instance, the beautiful stained glass in the lobby.
The old elevator that was in the lobby, we totally restored, put in new mechanism, kept the small cab, and it's a beautiful thing running up and down, but it has all modern works in it.
Two wood-paneled meeting rooms adjacent to the lobby were also restored, as was the interior of the original dining room. As the restoration progressed inside the hotel, workers labored on the building exterior and grounds. Using modern construction techniques, workers rebuilt the 1/10 of the outside ring of the building that had collapsed in 1991. At the same time, restoration began on the exterior surfaces of the building.
The restoration crew from Pritchett had a method of erecting a set of scaffolding from the ground floor up to the 6th floor, and they would scrape, repair windows, tuck point, prime, paint, rebuild the scallop parapet, which was another element that the Jesuits had removed. They would do all of that all the way up and then move the scaffolding to counterclockwise and kind of work their way around the building that way. No exterior job that you can imagine was not on the list. I mean, it all had to be done. The outbuildings have all been restored on the exterior but left as is on the interior, with the exception of Hygeia, one of the Springs buildings, and that was a slightly more elaborate tiled and building with stained glass windows, so that building, the interior was restored as well. But the other outbuildings, Apollo, the Bowling and Billiard Pavilion, the stable and garage building, and the powerhouse were all restored on the exterior only.
We have no application for the buildings, the 3 buildings around the garden as yet. They enhance the garden.
However, the powerhouse is reused as the heating and cooling plant, and in that case we had to raise the level of the floor because the floor was below the 100-year flood level, so poured a new floor and installed heating and cooling equipment.
It was so interesting to see the disrepair that the gardens were in, and it also was very easy to identify the plants and the different things that had to go back into the garden and the buildings around it. We just decided that that was a perfect garden to restore.
The only kind of hands-on work that used volunteers is in the garden. We have a volunteer garden program.
Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, probably in the thousands even, have come to West Baden to work in the garden under supervision, and most importantly, the people that come to do the tours.
And we wouldn't be able to do that without these wonderful volunteers. They are such terrific ambassadors for the building, but most of the volunteers come from Orange County, and a lot of them have some family connection to the property. So a grandfather who worked there when it was a hotel, or a father who worked for the Jesuits or for Northwood, or they were a graduate of Northwood. Well, the fountain wasn't there when we began restoring the hotel, but people were so generous to lend us photos. And there was one volume in particular that the Historical Society in West Baden had that was page after page of photos of guests at the hotel posed sitting on the edge of a fountain with the hotel in the background. So we had wonderful photos of what this fountain looked like, and that was one of those instances where the scope of work grew a little, because the cooks said, well, there's just this to do, we just have to put that fountain back. Really, the garden needs it. And so they rebuilt it according to the historic photos.
Photography influenced another important aspect of the restoration.
When we saw the building and how magnificent the building was with the towers, we decided that it was worth the investment to go ahead and put them back.
Well, I've spent considerable time at the archives in the Jesuits in Chicago looking through all their old photographs, and we've taken all these photographs and scanned them into our computers, then enlarged them digitally so that we would have the actual shapes, the sizes, the ornaments, the detailing, proportion, scale, and get everything right, and then design the interior so that they don't blow down in years to come. The towers were built and assembled in Campbellsville, Kentucky by Campbellsville Industries. They were assembled there, then disassembled, hauled to this site, and reassembled. The towers are made out of an inner structural steel tubing network, and then the outside skin is baked enamel paint to the specific colors that we requested on an aluminum skin. The skin is mounted to the frame with a riveting method and an interior seam that makes a concealed joint. And all the interior framing is light gauge aluminum. The maximum wind velocity that the towers are designed to withstand is 80 miles an hour. For Campbellsville Industries, this was a very unique project for them because it's one of a kind. They'll never build another one like it again, and we actually have the copyright so that it can't be built again.
As the towers neared completion, we had to figure out a way to get them up on the tower frames. This was somewhat difficult because if we used a lift of any kind or a crane of any kind, we'd have to destroy a lot of the landscaping. We'd probably have to dig out a part of the hill to get the thing flat. We would have removed 100-year-old trees, and we decided that the only way that we could get those towers up was by helicopter. And there's only 3 of these helicopters in the United States. It lifts 18,000 pounds.
We figured people would come in flock and stop along the highway and gawk anyway, so we might as well formalize the occasion and make it kind of the topping off ceremony.
Sort of the crown of everything that we had done because there were literally thousands of people there to watch it happen.
The original architect did a marvelous job. When you saw the tower set on there, then you really realized the genius of this guy.
The towering finale marked the completion of the first phase of the West Baden Springs Hotel restoration. Cook Group has invested over $30 million in the project. The eventual purchaser of the hotel will need to invest about $20 million more. Historic Landmarks Foundation seeks a buyer who has both financial ability and sensitivity to the historic and architectural significance of the property. Regardless of the eventual outcome of that search, today, visitors again stand admiring the building's splendor. Lee Sinclair's magnificent dream has been saved.